At first glance, it looks like your average high school in Japan. Classrooms filled with students scribbling notes, some deep in their math or science textbooks, others just counting down the minutes until that final bell. When the day ends, some kids head out for soccer or rugby practice, while others drift down the halls to their music lessons, the school slowly emptying out like any other. But walk a little deeper inside, and something unexpected stands out: portraits. Not of local heroes or school founders, but of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il, the former leaders of North Korea. These aren't just decorations. They're a central part of daily life here. Every morning, students put on their traditional uniforms and gather under the gaze of those portraits before starting their day. And here's the twist. Most of these students have never even set foot on the Korean peninsula. This is the Tokyo Korean Middle and High School, home to around 650 students. It's one of only 10 schools in Japan with deep historical ties to North Korea. The students here are part of a unique community, Koreans living in Japan who support Chongrayon. Chongrayon isn't just an organization, it's a cultural and political lifeline. Born in the aftermath of widespread discrimination against Koreans in Japan, it became a place where people could hold on to their identity. Over time, it built schools, a university, and entire communities, all with support from North Korea. For many families, Chongrayon wasn't about where they came from, but about finding belonging in a place where they were often made to feel like outsiders. But to understand how this all came to be, you have to go back, like way back. You see, back in the early 1900s, there weren't many Koreans living in Japan. That started to change after Japan took over the Korean peninsula in 1910. By the 1920s, Japan was facing a labor shortage, and Korean workers began coming over in large numbers. Most of them took on tough, low-paying jobs, factory work, construction, manual labor. Because they were seen as outsiders and faced heavy discrimination, many Koreans ended up forming tight-knit, separate communities just to survive. Things took a darker turn during World War II. With Japan desperate for more workers, Korean men and women were either forced or tricked into coming to Japan. Some were kidnapped, others were promised jobs and better lives, only to be thrown into grueling labor conditions once they arrived. They were sent to work in mines, build underground bases, and manufacture weapons. Even children were made to dig miles of tunnel networks using nothing but pickaxes and their bare hands. Right before Japan surrendered in 1945, the government ordered all records of these secret projects destroyed. No one knows exactly how many lives were lost, but historians estimate that around 239,000 Koreans died because of the war and the brutal labor conditions. When the war finally ended in August 1945, about 2 to 2.5 million Koreans were living in Japan. A huge majority, about 80%, wanted to return home. But for most, going back just wasn't possible. The US occupation authorities wouldn't let them take any belongings. If they left, they couldn't come back to see family. And after years of discrimination and economic hardship, most didn't have the money to start over again in Korea. So they stayed. The Koreans who remained were labeled Zainichi, which means foreigners residing in Japan. But the word made it sound like they were just temporary visitors, not people trying to build new lives. That label alone helped reinforce a deep divide between Japanese citizens and the Korean minority. After the war, Japan began pushing the idea of being a country with one single identity. Ethnic nationalism grew stronger, and Korean communities were pushed even further to the margins. Any early efforts to help Koreans fit in quietly disappeared. Over the decades, discrimination stayed baked into the system. In 1986, the Japanese Prime Minister even made international headlines for implying that Japan was more advanced than the US because it didn't have racial minorities like Black or Hispanic communities. That kind of mindset showed just how deeply racial and ethnic divisions ran. Isolated and often ignored, many Korean residents in Japan turned inward. They joined groups like Chongrayon and Mindan, each aligning with different Korean governments, North and South Korea, respectively. But despite their political differences, both groups agreed on one thing: Korean children in Japan needed schools where they could feel safe, be accepted, and learn about their culture. So they built their own school systems. Mindan schools offered instruction mostly in Japanese, with Korean as an extra subject. Jong-un schools took a completely different path. They taught in Korean, decorated classrooms with portraits of Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il, and referred to North Korea as the fatherland. Their maps showed one unified Korea, with Pyongyang as the capital. Students even took school trips to North Korea, where they were welcomed with open arms. The North Korean government didn't just influence the curriculum, it actually created it. Jong-un grew steadily, with North Korea providing money, materials, and a mission. They weren't just running schools, they were building a community. The headmaster of the Chiba Korean School once explained that North Korea stepped in when no one else would help. In the 1950s, when these schools had almost nothing, it was Pyongyang that offered funding, support, and identity. All of this ended up creating a school system that felt completely cut off from the rest of Japanese society. Korean students were brought up inside a North Korean bubble, taught history, geography, and politics in a way that was totally different from what their Japanese classmates were learning. It wasn't just about math and science. It was about shaping their identity, raising them to feel connected to a faraway homeland, even if they'd never actually been there. Then, in the late 1950s, Jong-un kicked off this program called Return to Paradise. And honestly, on paper, it looked like a total dream. Back then, North Korea's economy seemed to be doing better than South Korea's, and Jong-un was out there, especially in its schools and communities, painting the North as this bright, hopeful place where Zainichi Koreans could finally build a better life. The message clicked, and nearly 100,000 people, most of them Jong-un members, packed up and left Japan behind. But for many, what they found in North Korea was far from paradise. One woman, Hyang-soo Park, saw this reality unfold through the pain of her own family. Some of her relatives were among those who made the move. Years later, when she visited them, what she walked into was heartbreak. Her uncle had disappeared, arrested and sent to a brutal labor camp. The rest of the family was living in fear, shaking as they spoke, terrified that they too could be taken. Eventually, Park learned her uncle had died after being tortured. The rest of the family was sent to the infamous Yodok prison camp. After that visit, she and her mother never heard from them again. Her mother was left shattered, filled with guilt and regret, and they weren't alone. Many who had trusted Jong-un's promises and left Japan ended up trapped in a regime that punished even the smallest sign of disloyalty. Staying quiet and obedient was the only way to keep their families safe. But the story doesn't stop there. It gets more complicated. Documents later revealed that the Japanese government had quietly supported the idea of getting Zainichi Koreans to leave. Even before Jong-un's program began, officials had been discussing how to reduce the Korean population in Japan. While Pyongyang pushed the dream, Tokyo turned a blind eye to the fears and pain of the people caught in the middle. And to this day, many Zainichi Koreans still live in a kind of in-between space. Even though they were born and raised in Japan, they don't hold Japanese citizenship. That would mean taking on Japanese names, something many refuse to do, choosing instead to hold on to their Korean identity. But that choice comes at a cost. Without citizenship, they can't vote, can't run for office, and often feel invisible in the political system. The challenges don't end with politics. In everyday life, discrimination lingers. Some activists in Japan have targeted Korean schools, linking them with the North Korean government. That kind of hostility has created a deep cultural divide. There are stories of students being denied basic things, like the chance to donate blood, just because of their Korean heritage. Others have struggled to find jobs or faced trouble when trying to travel abroad. And for young students just trying to get to school, feeling safe wasn't a given. One girl said she never wore her traditional Korean school uniform outside. She'd wait until she got to school to change, just to avoid the stares and the fear. Things then reached a boiling point on October 4th, 2022, when North Korea fired a medium-range missile right over northern Japan. Sirens wailed. Phones buzzed. Loudspeakers blared across Hokkaido, Aomori, and Miyagi, warning people to take cover indoors. No one knew what was coming next. Thankfully, the missile landed harmlessly in the Pacific, but the fear it stirred up, that didn't just disappear. That very same day in Tokyo, things took an ugly turn. A Korean student was harassed on a train. Some man stomped on his foot, completely unprovoked. Not long after, reports came in that another man had stormed into an elementary school run by Chosen Soren, shouting threats at both a teacher and a student. And these weren't isolated cases. Police recorded at least 9 other incidents just like them, and the online world wasn't any kinder. Social media was flooded with hateful posts, some even calling for pro-Pyongyang schools to be burned down. For Koreans living in Japan, especially those tied to the North Korean community, this kind of backlash wasn't new, but it was picking up again fast. Much of the hostility was aimed at students from schools affiliated with the General Association of Korean Residents in Japan, better known as Chosen Soren. This group has long acted like a kind of unofficial embassy for North Koreans in Japan, representing those who still feel a connection to Pyongyang. With missile tests continuing, school officials started to worry things could get worse. They called on the Japanese government to increase protection around these schools and to crack down on anyone targeting the students. The editor of a North Korean community newspaper, Choe Kwan-ik, explained that the school uniforms make the kids easy to spot and even easier to single out. He said students have been kicked, punched, yelled at, and told to leave the country. According to the students, most of the threats are coming from grown men, often in public places, while others just stand by and do nothing. Leaders from Chosen Soren and a Japanese human rights group that defends ethnic minorities took their concerns directly to the Justice Ministry. They urged the government to take a stand before something even more serious happens. After the meeting, the president of the Tokyo Korean Junior and High School Teachers Union shared how upsetting it was that these attacks happened in front of crowds, and no one stepped in to help. Meanwhile, North Korean state media fired back with strong words, accusing Japanese authorities and the press of stirring up tension and pushing a negative image of North Korea. In one article, they condemned the treatment of Korean children in Japan as unjust and abusive. Chung Hyeon-suk, a North Korean woman now living in Japan, said she's relieved her children are no longer in school. She remembers how cruel things could get, like the time someone spray-painted a warning on her family's house just because they were North Korean. For her, these cycles of hate always seem to follow missile tests, and she's tired of watching innocent kids become targets. She still hopes that, despite everything, the two countries can find a way to move past all this tension. On top of all the threats and harassment, there's also a big issue with inequality. The schools many of these students attend, Chongryeon schools, aren't even recognized as proper educational institutions by the Japanese government. They're labeled as miscellaneous schools, which basically means fewer benefits and way less financial support compared to regular schools. And whatever little funding they used to get, it's been drying up fast. Local governments say they're worried these schools are promoting a positive image of Pyongyang or misusing public money. But for the schools themselves, the impact has been rough. Some are being forced to merge just to stay open, and others have had to shut down altogether. In southern Japan, the financial squeeze became very real when one city slashed its planned school subsidy by more than a third. Supporters of the affected school launched an online petition, gathering over 5,000 signatures and pleading with the city council to reconsider. They pointed out that since a 2010 law supporting private high schools was passed, only schools affiliated with North Korea had been excluded from the benefits. The message was clear. Without help, these schools were in serious trouble. The broader North Korean community in Japan has been feeling the strain for years. At Korea University in Tokyo, the only North Korean-affiliated university outside of North Korea, a professor spoke about the difficult balance many Korean parents try to maintain. They want their children to grow up understanding their roots, even while living in Japan. But rising costs and disappearing subsidies are making that harder. Still, the professor remained hopeful, believing the community would rally around the schools, even if government support dried up. The history here runs deep. Most of Japan's North Korean community, known as Zainichi Koreans, descend from families brought to Japan during its colonial rule of Korea. Many have permanent residency, but choose not to become Japanese citizens in order to preserve their Korean identity. Over time, that decision has often come with consequences. For instance, years ago, the government stopped providing funding to North Korean kindergartens. In response, protests broke out in Tokyo, with demonstrators arguing that this was part of a broader pattern of exclusion. Once, there were over 140 Chongryeon-run schools in Japan, with nearly 50,000 students. Now there are about 70, serving just over 10,000 students. It's not just about shrinking numbers. There's been a deliberate move from the national government to pull back. Tokyo and Osaka stopped funding Chongryeon schools back in 2016 after investigating the curriculum and finding praise for North Korea's leadership, while controversial topics like the abduction of Japanese citizens were ignored. Conservative voices in Japan have welcomed these cuts. To them, taxpayer money should not go to institutions that show loyalty to North Korea, a country known for its authoritarian rule and missile launches. Some critics also highlight that a few Chongryeon-affiliated individuals have been involved in serious criminal allegations. Stories like the school principal in Osaka, who fled to North Korea while under investigation, or the administrator in Shimonoseki accused of trafficking drugs, have been used to justify calls for stricter oversight and complete defunding. The argument is that these students could simply attend Japanese public schools like everyone else. But for families in the North Korean community, it's not that simple. One mother, whose sons attended a Korean high school in Tokyo, shared her frustration. "Running these schools is expensive," she said, "but they are a vital part of preserving culture and identity." She stressed that their schools aren't brainwashing centers and that their children are taught to think critically, many of them identifying with both Korean and Japanese communities. These parents believe education is a basic right, and their schools are not about politics, but about belonging. For them, losing these institutions means more than just closing school doors. It means losing a lifeline to heritage, to community, to a sense of who they are. Japan is one of the world's most developed democracies, but many in the Korean community still feel left out. While some have chosen to naturalize and take Japanese names, many remain stateless, caught between two identities. To them, Japan needs to do more than just tolerate their presence. It needs to offer a path toward real inclusion. Because when communities feel seen, supported, and respected, the pull of isolation and resentment weakens. And maybe then, the walls between these two worlds can finally start to come down. What do you think about Japan's mini North Korea? Drop a comment, like the video, and make sure to subscribe for more unusual places and stories.